Can you ovulate without a period? So let's just make sure we're on the same page and we understand that the primary event of our cycle is ovulation, not our period. So in the grand timeline of things, our ovulation comes before our period. Our period is the end of our cycle. We can get a period without ovulating. This is called an anovulatory cycle, but we cannot ovulate without a period. And that's because the period will come after the ovulation. Ovulation is when an egg is released from one of our ovaries. And the whole point of this is to keep the human species going. And so after ovulation, if the egg is not fertilized, then it'll be marked by menstruation. The uterine lining will shed because a pregnancy did not occur. And so our period begins. And after our period's over, that is when our new cycle begins. Now, if we're using a fertility awareness method to track our cycle, whether that's for conception or contraception, we will typically start to see an increase in cervical mucus, and changes of texture and color will also occur before ovulation, and this is marked by an increase in estrogen. Depending on which fertility awareness method you're using, there will be other markers to confirm ovulation and progesterone production. Now, if we're only tracking our cycles using cervical mucus, this can create a lot of inaccuracies and confusion. And let me tell you why. Remember that cervical mucus is a sign for estrogen, and we look for that before we ovulate. But many women have estrogen dominance or estrogen dominant conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, etc. And so they can experience cervical mucus at many different times of their cycle, regardless of whether or not they are ovulating. So it can make things really, really confusing if you're only trying to track your cycle using cervical mucus. And this can be especially confusing postpartum because our body is trying to regulate itself. There are so many different factors like how we're nourishing ourselves, are we breastfeeding, etc. that can, kind of influence when our cycle comes back. But that cycle coming back can be touch and go, for a couple months. It takes time for it to re-regulate itself. So postpartum, we could be experiencing cervical mucus changes, increases in cervical mucus due to increases in surges in estrogen, but they could be anovulatory, especially if they're not preceded by a period. That said, the only time we can ovulate without a period, and typically, we're always going to have some kind of bleed, whether it's super light or super heavy, that is going to precede a ovulation. To continue, we can ovulate without a period if a pregnancy has occurred. And so this can really occur for anyone, but if we're tracking our cycles, we're probably going to know when this is happening. But say, we are tracking our cycles too, but we have irregular cycles, or say our cycle has disappeared and is coming back, or say we're postpartum and, we see that fertile cervical mucus and then we don't get a period, it's possible there is a pregnancy that occurred. So the takeaway is cervical mucus can be a helpful marker to help us better understand what's going on in our cycle and to track it. But it shouldn't be the only thing that we look at. And ovulation cannot occur without a period, but periods can occur without an ovulation.